Hello, and welcome back to episode 7 of Veridian County, our realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to draw out tram lines throughout our city, connecting Grand Central to the downtown region and areas beyond the current city boundaries. Once we've done that, we'll strategically locate tram depots at terminus stations for our most accessible tram lines, serving current and future transit expansions in the city of Lemuria. Lastly, I want to establish the hub of Veridian County's power through the development of Soul Industries, including a solar plant, water treatment facilities, and a world-class nuclear power plant. Before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we anchored our new development in the Greater Grand Central District with a massive, fully custom convention center with 1 million square feet of programmable space and nearly 500 parking stalls. Then we anchored our new development in the East Asian Cultural District with a monumental city library that serves not just this cultural district, but the entire city of Lemuria. And we anchored our new development on the Cultural District's hilltop area with a historic German mall, working with the topography to urbanize the hill and ensure the mall remains a prominent feature for all to behold. In today's episode, I want to begin by drawing out our tram lines all throughout our city. You may or may not remember, but in episode 1, we actually planned out initial ideas for tram lines to run throughout our city, but the majority of those ideas were done before the development of downtown was actually completed. Now that we have more parts of downtown developed, it might be worth revisiting those ideas, so let's take a look at those. In case you don't remember, these are the maps that we had put together for Veridian County in the very first episode that we had done, and the map that we want to look at today is this one down here in the bottom corner, Lemuria City Rail. In this map, we drew out our initial ideas for subway lines and tram lines, where the tram lines are the lighter line weight that's a little bit lower and less thick than the subway lines that we've got going on. Now, we've already started to draw out some of these subway lines, and we'll revisit them in a future episode, but for now, let's focus on the tram lines. Now, in this initial plan, we'd actually accounted for 3 main tram lines, and their main purpose is to provide both redundancy for the subway lines, provide closer access to major tourism destinations, and connect up to neighborhoods that might not necessarily deserve a subway line because they might not be dense enough, but they deserve some sort of rail transit to provide frequent service. On this map, we're also using trams as a way of getting around hillsides in areas where the subway lines might not be able to reach just because the hill is too steep for the subway trains to summit. Trams are notoriously really good at doing this job. One of my personal favorites is the Peak Tram in Hong Kong, which goes up a nearly 45-degree angle at some points as it makes its way from the bottom of the hill, way over here where all the skyscrapers are, all the way up to the top of the building where the actual peak tourism area is, where you get these nice looks down to the city. This tram goes straight up the side of the mountain, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and it just really showcases the power that trams have. There's a number of other trams around the world that also snake their way up the hills. In Switzerland, I know they have a lot of trams similar to that as well. I've never been there, but a friend of mine has told me all about them, and they're just such pretty sights to behold. So if we can recreate an atmosphere like this, I will be so satisfied with our public transit system. Nearby the city of Lemuria, we have 3 major hills to contend with. We've got this area over here, which we've called Birdsong Park, which is a little bit of a mountain range that borders the Marina District and the Civic Center. Here we've got Valley Hill, which is surrounded by our Central Business District, main downtown area, Greater Grand Central, and Western Heights to the west of it. And lastly, we've got the hill in the center of the East Asian Cultural District, which bounds Greater Grand Central, the Cultural District, and Old Town. The East Asian Cultural District hill we developed in the last episode, so I don't necessarily think that that needs a tram to run straight through it, but the other 2 hills I feel like could benefit from having a tram line running through them. Starting off with Valley Hill, here's we got the yellow line. The yellow line will run through our Old Town area. It'll primarily go on Hawthorne Street, which is our big loop-de-loop street that runs through the area that we built out with tram tracks from the get-go, but it'll take a little brief stop over it to the ferry building because the ferry building is going to be a major hub for passenger transport. Then it'll cross over that intersection that we built in episode 2 before snaking its way up Valley Hill, making its way through Western Heights and heading towards the airport before passing the main airport interchange and heading over to Air Lim where it'll terminate and meet up with a subway station at this transit terminus over here. There's a chance that in the future we'll extend this line into the national park, but we'll take a deeper look at that later on. Serving the other hill, we've got the Magenta line. The Magenta line runs somewhat parallel to our subway service through the main downtown area, but it'll run at grade. Then at some point in the Noto neighborhood, which is the north of downtown neighborhood, it'll meet up with the red tram line before continuing to the Civic Center, where it'll meet up with 2 of our subway lines in a big transport hub, and then continuing on into Birdsong Park to provide transit service for the visitors over there. Lastly, we've got a line that doesn't really touch any of the mountains, but provides an essential service, and that is our waterfront tram. The waterfront tram will also begin at Grand Central over here, but it'll then make its way through Old Town, along the whole waterfront, past the Marina District still on the waterfront, and then it'll snake its way up through Nodo and into Uptown until it hits this little body of water over here. This is something that as we develop our airport district might end up changing a little bit, but for now, this is a good start. Now, if we remember those 3 subway lines as we come into the main area of downtown, I think they do a pretty good job of providing coverage to the entire area, but there's one major thing that I think is missing. Currently, we've been planning for all the trams to run along Walnut Street and then intersect with Hawthorne Street right over here. But that ends up missing out on this entire East Asian Cultural District, and there's a lot of really important things over here that I think would be beneficially served by a tram. College students oftentimes don't drive a car, and this college in particular has very little parking for the students, so I think a tram is essential to serve this college. Plus, the city library is a major destination for visitors. You can see just how many people are trying to get over here, especially from Grand Central Station. So I think we'd be remiss not to provide a tram line that runs directly from Grand Central Station through this right past the city library in some way, so that people don't have to take the subway one stop to get off at this metro stop. Instead, they can just take the tram on some of the local streets and head into the city library. Then, rather than paralleling Hawthorne Street and making this kind of awkward turn in and out of the ferry terminal, I think it would be nice to have this tram continue along the waterfront over here, just to serve some of these different piers and these different uses that we have along there until it hits the harbor, and that's when I think we can turn it back into Hawthorne Street like all the other tram lines. From there, rather than overcomplicating things, because it's going to be doing a lot of weaving throughout the East Asian Cultural District, I think we'll just end the line pretty simply. We've already built out the tram connection right over here to connect from this big overpass back down to Green Street, and none of our proposed tram lines actually use it. So what I'm essentially proposing is that we add in a circulator loop right around here that goes from Grand Central through the Cultural District, Old Town, and makes its way right back to Grand Central. Just like that. It'll be a little bit shorter of a line, but I think it's going to provide a really valuable service for this neighborhood. With all that planning done, let's begin to actually draw out our tram lines. If you were paying attention in the last few episodes, you would have noticed that we actually began to lay out our tram tracks from the very first time that we placed roads in this district. Grand Central Station already has major tram infrastructure all around this transit bay that we've placed out front here. It's got 2 bays for tram stops, it's got parallel roads to allow the trams to pull in and out, turn around without interfering with one another, and it's got connections out both sides. Next step is going to be drawing in the additional tram tracks for our loop line, and maybe even drawing out some of the tram tracks for the remainder of our lines as well. Okay, I've drawn out the tram tracks for the loop line, and I actually drew in the route. For now, I've drawn it out as the purple line, and I've put it in this tram bay over here at Grand Central. It's not final, but it'll do at least for now. We have the trams coming out of Grand Central, heading towards the East Asian Cultural District, and stopping right in front of the station. But then I added new tram lines that run straight down Madison Street towards the Central Library, since I needed to serve the college and I really wanted to serve this commercial corridor back here, especially since we had a wider street. Instead of having the tram lines make this tight turn around the corner over here, I had them instead do a 90, run down this main road over here, and then head closer to the college. They stop on the waterfront. I put a stop over here to access the night market, as well as a couple in the corner just so that you can get on or off at either end right here, and they're still somewhat close. And even as this main road narrows down over here to a 2-lane, we still have the trams running along the whole waterfront, following the coastline until we hit the harbor. Once we hit the harbor, there's a couple of one-way streets, so the tram does a little bit of a circular motion around here where it comes in, stops right in front of the harbor on one way, and on the other way it's a little bit across the road, but I think that's still pretty close and that's just fine for our needs. And at this point, the tram makes its way onto Hawthorne Street, where it'll be running along with the red and the yellow lines. Then it makes its way up onto the overpass. Then it slowly snakes its way down before making its way right back into Grand Central Station. This is the line that I was most worried about, which is why I did it first, because it wasn't actually on our master plan for the region. But quite frankly, I think it's a fantastic thing to have running around here. We have a line running in clockwise direction and in counterclockwise, because unlike our other routes, this is not an out and back route. This is one that links and completes itself in a circle, so we did need a clockwise and counterclockwise route. Time to draw out a couple more of these. Alright, what I've done since I last saw you is I've drawn out the tram tracks for the remainder of our route. Starting with the line that runs through Valley Hill, this is our yellow line, so that's going to be running from Grand Central Station all the way along Hawthorne Street, merge back up with Hawthorne Street after this overpass. And then the change I made is rather than running this tram road all the way down, Hawthorne Street actually turns into a 6-lane road as we pass the Stadium District, and the tram instead turns up along Spring Street and begins to head into Valley Hill. Once it's here, it really makes its way all the way up until you hit this little plateau over here. I expect that we'll probably build a little something here on the plateau and keep the rest of it as a big old park. But then it curves its way all the way around this hill, slowly makes its way down to the Western Heights Plateau, then to the Hamilton Street Plateau. It comes up briefly over this hill, which will probably end up developing into suburbs at some point, and then it makes its way down to the Airlim Plateau that we have over here, where this roundabout and future highway interchange is going to be. Then, just as we planned, it ends in Airlim, right next to Verdant State Park. I do think that this park is a great future addition for the tram. Since trams are really good at climbing up the mountains, this could be a major way of providing public transit service to the state park, where buses might not otherwise be able to go. They could make their way up into the peaks of the mountains, really provide access to these higher up areas for skiing, for hiking, for camping, anything along those lines. But at least for now, I'm going to keep the line as long as it is, because we are nowhere near developing this part of the city yet, and this is already a somewhat long tram line. Anyway, moving on to the third line that's planning to run through Hawthorne Street and through Old Town, we have our waterfront line, which is going to run from Grand Central all along Hawthorne Street past the harbor, and then it's going to turn here onto Mill Street, run through the Waters District, past this little park over here, past our Central Business District. Then it's going to make its way past this roundabout and run all the way around our Marina District, with stops right here next to the metro station. Then it's going to follow its way up through Nodo, right past the Nodo station. I've added the tram tracks here on Crescent Street and extended it out through Uptown. And then it makes its way up here to the top of this little plateau that we have over here, which I wasn't really sure what to do with, but I thought it might be a good place to end our tram lines for now. Lastly, we have the Magenta route, which I haven't done any changes to since we last spoke. That's still going to run along Grand Central and through Birdsong Park. Since our Old Town Peninsula loop goes in both directions, I think we can take this down to as few vehicles as possible, especially seeing as there's actually not that many stops compared to some of the other lines. So the Peninsula Loop 1 and Loop 2 can each be 2 vehicles, for a current total of 4. Then T2, which runs to the Birdsong Park via the Central Business District, I've lowered down to 6 vehicles because I think that feels about right. It's a somewhat straightforward route too, it's not got any major loops or turns or major hill sections besides here in Birdsong Park itself, so we're up to a total of 10 trams. Here in our big old waterfront line, this is a pretty long line, it runs all the way along the waterfront and has a whole lot of stops along the way, but it's also really duplicating existing subway service, so we don't need it to be particularly complicated. It's mostly going to be a big tourist mover around the area. And lastly, we've got our Airlim via Valley Hill line, which is somewhat long, maybe not as long as the whole red line. Looks like the red line is currently at 9.4 miles, where our Airlim line is only at 8.5, so I lowered this one to 6, especially because in the most dense area of town, it's duplicated by multiple other subway lines. So when you combine that, we got 10 across the first 3 lines, plus 8 for T3, and another 6 for T4. That means we're at 24 required trams. And each tram depot has a base service of 10 trams, with a garage extension for an additional 5. So we have the option of either placing down 3 tram depots or 2 tram depots, one of which has an upgrade to really cover out our service. Just as we did with our train lines, I want to add some redundancy into this. So rather than having exactly as many as we need, or having 25 trams for 24 that we have required on the lines, I want to add a little bit of redundancy. So I'm thinking that we'll place down 2 tram depots and upgrade both of them to have a maximum of 15 for a total of 30 trams that we have capacity for. This means that when we do any extensions, we do have a little bit of overhead, so we're not immediately running out. And if there's any maintenance, we're not going to run into capacity issues on our trams. This is a pretty nice sized asset, so we don't want to have it located right in downtown. That would be replacing some pretty valuable density. So instead, I'm thinking that we'll probably place these out on the terminus ends of our lines. Our first line is just a loop, so there's not really a good place to have that. So we have 3 other lines that are coming out here. Birdsong Park has a pretty decent opportunity for a tram stop over here in the Civic Center, but I'm really not sure how the Civic Center will develop yet. In the future, I could totally see us placing a tram depot down just like this, and maybe putting some static ploppable buildings right on top of it as if the tram depot is the ground level function for a big old office building above. But since I'm not sure how this district will shape out yet, I don't think I want to place it in here, and there's certainly not the room to place it at the end of Birdsong Park. So that leaves the Airland line and Uptown line as our 2 major spots for the tram depots, and honestly, just from above, I think they work out pretty well. Then in both of these cases, we can connect up to the highway using a local road just to provide access service for any of the employees who are working at the tram depot, although there's a pretty decent chance that they'll just take the tram in there themselves. Pretty good. And with all that said and done, it looks kind of like this. Starting out with the easier Airland station, this is a pretty flat piece of land already, so I just filled in the depression, made sure that it was at the right height and the same height as all the highways around here. Then I drew in a couple of access roads, one that comes straight off the highway at a 90 with a little bit of a traffic light, which frankly can probably be removed and turned into a stoplight if it'll let me. And so we've got a little road over here where the tram track comes in, merges up with the station, and then continues on to its final stop. Here in the Uptown tram depot, it's a little bit tighter of a fit than over there where it's just on this big platform. Here we're in a plateau right next to a big cliffside where we got these rail lines, but I managed to squeeze it in, so we got our main frontage road comes off here right opposite the landfill entrance, so we got a little bit of an intersection right there. We already had this highway turning into a local street just to serve the landfill, so I just dredged the road off from there. It's called Daffodil Street, and then it comes here right along this cliffside to provide service to the tram depot. The tram depot has trams coming in right after their final stop at a 90-degree angle, and this one is also upgraded to a maximum of 15. So with the 14 here and the 10 at the other depot, we've got 24 trams in use as promised. And it means that we've got tram service where we want it to be. Look at that, look at all the people using our trams. What I really want to show to you is Grand Central Station. You can see that right here we've got our 4 tram bays. Fun fact, for any of you playing this game with me, tram stops will stop the tram in the middle of its middle car. So trams are by default 3 cars long, and where you place the tram track, it'll stop in the middle, not in the front where the main entrance might be. It'll stop right in the middle there. So you don't want to place your tram stop like right around here where the crosswalk is, because the tram will then pull forwards and have the middle of the tram right there, and you'll be blocking your crosswalk. Instead, you want to place them closer to mid-block. So it's a little bit different from bus stops in that way. And hey, here's a tram to demonstrate for us. This red tram is a Old Town Peninsula loop, one of the ways, and it's got 38 people on it, and you can see that it stops right in the middle and it all lines up just like that. So I had to adjust every single stop to accommodate for that. But hey, at the end of the day, it's working out pretty well. We got people building up over here on our 4 main platforms that we got. We've got trams pulling in and out all along here. They're kind of recolored funky, and I'm really not sure what's going on with that, but I'm thinking that once they go back into the tram depot and come back out, it'll probably fix itself all up, so I'm not too worried about that. You can see the trams are running pretty well by the city library as well. There's some pretty heavy usage along this line as well, as expected, because there's so many people coming in from the city library. Like, look at that, this is just from the tram stop right there. Likewise, at our harbor, you can see we've got a couple of trams pulling in here. This is a pretty popular area, and we're getting some pretty sweet usage. Now that we have our tram lines developed, it's time to move on to the development of our world-class nuclear facility for Veridian County. And we're going to be doing that up here in Seoul Industries. Veridian County is a major player in the broader Pacific Northwest region, but it can't keep buying the majority of its power from outside connections forever. So far, the city has been relying pretty heavily on its incineration plants and coal power plant located in Old Road Bay, but these are simply not keeping up anymore. In fact, the city's mayor has installed temporary wind turbines using cheaply made materials, but these are not designed to stand up to the test of time, and even these temporary wind turbines are not providing the power that the city needs. So all of the major towns and cities here in Veridian County have gathered their funds together to subsidize the development of a new industrial area, providing world-class clean energy for the entire region. This is going to be located up here in Seoul Industries, and we're going to be providing a massive amount of power by making use of the nuclear power plant and solar power plants. But before we get working on this nuclear power plant, as always, it's important to take a look at some precedent imagery. Now, when I was asking around for nuclear power plants to look at, there were a bunch of different options that came up all around the world. And it's true, there are tons of nuclear power plants all around the world, but what I really wanted to do was find one that somewhat closely matched the City Skylines 2 asset that we were looking at. Near here in Seattle, there's a big old nuclear plant facility called the Hanford facility, but I really couldn't gather a whole lot of information just by looking at this, so I moved on to the next candidate. Over in New York, there is also a big nuclear plant, but just like the Hanford site, I really couldn't gather a lot of information from this, and it doesn't actually have the big steam stacks, exhaust stacks that I'm pretty used to when I think of a nuclear power plant and when I see the ones in game. So I also moved on to the next candidate. Hong Kong doesn't really have a proper nuclear power plant of its own. You really got to go to mainland China to see one of those. So instead I started to look at places beyond my main source of inspiration in the Pacific Northwest, New York and Hong Kong, and I looked to California, where they have the Diablo Canyon power plant. Now this is a power plant that is right on the coast, so you really get to see some of the protection infrastructure that they have from the big waves over here. It's built up very slightly from the ocean, and it's got some protections from the water, but kind of similar to Indian Point, I didn't really see any major steam stack. What I did see here is that they've got multiple transformer stations, they've got some sort of water treatment facility, they've got their main building, some maintenance, and a whole lot of parking. So I started to take some of these components and ask around, hey, what might these water treatment plants be? And I ended up stumbling upon the Cofrentes nuclear power plant in Cofrentes, Spain. This here is a lot more similar to what I would expect to see in City Skylines 2 and has a fascinating, frankly fascinating layout. Now here we've also got the big steam exhaust that I'm used to, but you can also see some surfaced water pathways. You can see this water treatment area over here, which I think seems to be like for cooling rods of some sorts. This water treatment facility over here, which seems to be to prevent overflow into the river. We've got some solar transformers. We've got the main reactor. We've got a couple of parking facilities. We've got some helipads, presumably for fire, and a couple of other things as they branch off into the mountains. Now, I was super interested in this plant, so I started to do a little bit more research into it. And this is amazing. I actually ended up finding here on the Cofrentes Nuclear Power Plant website, they have a building layout page, which I highly suggest that each of you read, and I'll be linking it in the description if I remember to, and if I don't remember to, please yell at me in the comments. This building layout page is fascinating. There's a few main pieces of information that we get from here. There's an exclusion area of 750 meters centered around the reactor, and within this exclusion area is where most of the buildings that serve the reactor are located. This also means that they can't have any civilian residential infrastructure, commercial infrastructure, or just general through traffic in this exclusion area. It is exclusively a nuclear facility within this range. They don't want to have any risk, so if there is some sort of nuclear meltdown, this exclusion area will protect the residents all around there. The buildings around here can be grouped into a main building zone, a cooling and liquid management zone, and the actual power station. All this text explains things pretty well, but what I think the coolest part of this is this map over here. Here we can see we've got the cooling towers in one part, you've got your water treatment that loops into the main buildings, and this water treatment facility up here, which I think is where the cooling for the rods is, or something like that. Then we've got the spill control to protect the river. We got offices and warehouses, parking, and a couple more offices. This map is something that I'm really going to be using as we develop Seoul Industries here in game, so keep an eye on this and we'll refer back to it at the end of the episode. Here in game, the biggest problem that we have is that the nuclear power plant is somewhat all-inclusive. It's got a whole lot of facilities in here, it's got the cooling towers, but it's very rectangular. And here in Seoul Industries, which is this piece of land that was parceled off for this, we don't actually have a whole lot of area for it. So instead, we're going to be doing a lot of land reclamation. This is a somewhat hilly area, so we're going to be doing a little bit of flattening. We're going to be pulling the land out into this little bay over here and transforming this bay into our spill control area and water treatment area that we saw on the previous map. So just for drill, let's go ahead and place down this nuclear power plant right about here. When this is done and a little bit of terraforming is done, we end up with a somewhat flat pad and a potentially feasible site. In addition to that, I ended up taking, assuming that this is somewhat like the center of our reactor, maybe right over here, I kind of drew out a rough circle that's something like 750 meters, 800 yards, something like that away from this area. We do have a little bit of a hill, so on this side I thought the exclusion area could be a bit closer since the hill provides a natural buffer, but over on the other side where it's somewhat flat and we got a river in the way, we really wanted this buffer area to be somewhat far out. Then once we get to the north and the west, the train really provides this border for us, so we just know that we don't want to go any further than that. But this kind of serves as our general exclusion area right over here. This is our big circle that we're going to be developing for Seoul Industries today. Now, step one in all this is always placing down our big roadways. There's a couple of things that I wanted to keep in mind for this. Nuclear facilities are typically somewhat gated off facilities. They don't allow anybody into there, especially in the most specific of areas. So as if you develop the other side of the riverfront, that one can probably be a little bit more open, which is why it's currently connected up to the highway. But over here on the industry side where we had the nuclear power plant, we really want this to be a little bit more restricted of a facility. I've taken our narrowest roadway, which is essentially just a 2-lane road with shoulders on either side and no parking. And I've drawn that off from the highway at a 90 with a little bit of a roundabout and brought it into parallel to our train station, so that this road then runs out to Portoslana as a little bit of a back road that's somewhat low traffic. Then as we approached our nuclear facility, I brought that out at a 90 and had it cross the train tracks, and right over here is where we'll have our main limited entry area. We've already got these gates for the railway line, so I thought we can repurpose those and have a sign in, sign out system for the cars entering this area right over here, where we'll probably put in some, prop sheds or something to make it look like that. Then we've got the issue of topography to deal with. This is all up on this higher terrain, and we're going to be having some industrial traffic making its way down into here, so we can't have anything too steep. So out on one side, making our way to the front of this nuclear reactor, I just have this road smoothly curve its way down to this corner. It then makes its way all the way through, past the 2 main entrances into the nuclear power plant proper, and once it passes the second entrance, it splits off into a gravel alley. And this is because we need a second way out of this facility. We can't just have one way in or out, because if this then gets blocked by a fire, a train crash, some rubble, anything along those lines, if this gets blocked, then the whole area is screwed. So we need to have at least a second way out, even if it's not used all that often. So that's where this alleyway comes in. We've got this emergency fire alley that snakes its way up along the waterfront, through the coastline, and to this exclusion area boundary that we've got going on right over here on the opposite side of the hill. Once I had that road placed in, I drew in a straight road that connected up to the back side of this nuclear power plant and set the rear boundary. And then I used one of Tygon's rail assets to place in a train oil yard. There were a lot of different options for this that I could have picked, but I wanted something that was small, which is why we got this medium-sized train yard. And I wanted something that kind of looked like it will be processing the fluids or potentially industrial waste. So that's why we picked the oil one, because it's got these really cool barrels over here. Right next to that, I placed down a transformer station because we have our power lines coming out over here. So I drew out from our 3 power line connections, I connected them all up on the back side of this train yard. And then I drew the roads in. Then I've got it kind of looping in, just because it looked pretty, really. It kind of starts to form a little bit more modern of a shoreline, mimic the curves that we got in this nuclear power plant, just kind of create some curves. I think it'll look pretty as we develop that further. With that little bit of a road grid developed, of course we had to bridge the topography again, but I couldn't just have it come straight down because of these train tracks. These train tracks are also going to want to link into this main train line, but because they're at an angle, they're going to need to do a little bit of curving. So we're going to need to bring this train in and have it come around in some way. The train tracks can eventually connect up over here at its own angle. What this means is that we need enough clearance over the train tracks for this road over here, so I had this come up kind of at a straight section. This can be elevated for this portion over here where the train lines will run underneath it as they curve in. The road then curves its way down at a more gradual slope until it reaches this intersection over here where our train station entrance and exit is. That was a little bit hard to explain, but I think my next step is going to be placing in the rail line that connects up to this train track. Generally speaking, it's going to link up with the train tracks over here, make some sort of a curve gently underneath our roadway, and then snake its way right up into the train line at a little bit more gradual slope than I just drew out like that. And after a little bit more cleaning up, this is how it looks. The train lines come right out of the train yard, make their way underneath an elevated moor street with just enough clearance. Then they run parallel to this train track, which I've upgraded with a retaining wall, as they slowly make their way up to the same elevation and merge right before this big old bridge span. Now you can see that I've done a little bit more work over here. I brought back some of this water, and I've introduced our water treatment plants. And I picked these mostly because of the aesthetics of them. They've got these really cool tanks and water facilities that they've got going on over here. So firstly, I picked this Japanese water treatment plant because this is going to help us out with some of our sewage in the greater county area. And in theory, it's going to help to process some of the water from this nuclear power plant. I'm thinking that we'll split up these water bodies into 3. So this one will probably be 2 tanks, this will be a 3rd one, and presumably this water treatment plant will help to move some things from maybe a cooling facility right over here into a ready to discharge back into the river facility right over here. If we're discharging into the river, then we also need to extract from it. So that's where the water pumping station comes in, and I just love how this portion looks. There's a little bit of an inlet right here, and I think we will end up just cutting this whole thing off with some sort of retaining wall and turning this into a pond of its own. But I love having this water inlet right over here feeding into a advanced water pumping station. Then of course I just continue that little bumpy motif that we had going on with the roads, just to create a little bit of a character on this shoreline right like that. To start to fill in some of these areas, I've got a couple of ideas. We got to place down an office building over here just because that's something that the facilities managers of this entire Soul Industries would want to have. We need to place in a fire facility, but that cannot be underneath these power lines, so that'll probably be squeezed into this little parcel over here with some helicopter depots. I want to have some exposed water pipelines that run from these cooling towers all the way into these different facilities. I think we'll use one of these water surfaces, kind of like we did in our last couple episodes developing Grand Central, with some sort of surface pathways, and you really got this connected network over here that's not all underground. And lastly, I feel like this whole area is missing one more big water facility. So what I'm thinking is I'll do something revolutionary. I'll actually come over to Old Road Bay, where here we have this water treatment plant, and I'll steal this extra processing unit, bring it all the way over to Soul Industries, and find a way to place that right in here. Now, I did a bad job here because that's now water damaged and I can't move it because it's a sub-building, but just look at how this looks. This looks amazing, and it would be remiss to not have this here in the nuclear power plant. And here we go, all of our water infrastructure is now done. I use pedestrian pathways to create some retaining walls for ourselves and put retaining walls on the roads. Then I just lowered the terrain ever so slightly so it does actually look like a canal, and then I drew our water surface in just as we expected. So you've got these kind of bridges, underground segments, and this really cool water network from the cooling towers to each of these facilities. Then I drew out roadways around each of these water treatment areas, and I placed the extra processing unit in here just as we expected. This is a little bit more solid of a place. It's got an equal depth at the bottom and very defined shape, so I think this is where we'll put our cooling rod cooling. Then these two are a little bit more natural, so we'll probably be able to have some stones along the edges, and these will be our more intermediate steps as it goes from highly polluted over here, treatment through here, slightly less polluted, through these, slightly less polluted, and then pumped right back out into our water pumping area so that we can pump in and out and have a healthy circulation into this river. This is all separated, but I think this water pumping station is still looking just gorgeous. Now, my game just crashed for the 3rd time this episode, so I'll be back with you probably after a little vacation of mine, so see you then. Before we move on to the next section of the build, let's take a look at the Confrentis nuclear power plant's map once again, just to make sure that we've got everything covered. In fact, let's pull these up side by side so we can compare the two. On this side, we got the Confrentis nuclear power plant map. On here, we've got our version of a recreation of it. We've got the cooling towers already. We've got 2 tanks for spill control closest to the water outlet, plus of course a water inlet to provide water to the entire facility. We've got our surface water transmission areas that connect up the cooling towers to our spill control and our water treatment area, which we also have, and that's also a little bit more defined of a rectangle for it. We've got all of our main buildings all set in stone over here, but what we're missing are offices and warehouses and parking. Despite that, I'd say that we have the major components of the nuclear power plant in. This is technically a functional nuclear power plant now. Now that we have the major components of our nuclear power plant placed down, it's time to fill out the remainder of Seoul Industries within the nuclear power plant's exclusion area. I'm thinking that we want to fill up at least part of this awkwardly shaped parcel over here with some industrial uses and maybe a couple offices. We'll have them lining up both the top and the bottom streets with running parallel to each other, maybe with a little bit of surface parking there. I'm thinking that we'll turn this excavated area over here into our major surface parking lot for the facility. We'll fill this empty parcel over here with some sort of main office to oversee all of the water treatment and maybe in the rail yard over here. And over on the other side, I was debating what to do with this, whether we should turn it into generic industrial area, use specialized industries, or what. And I'm actually thinking that we'll place down a solar power plant. We saw a solar power plant in the satellite imagery for the Kafrenta's nuclear power plant, and I think it just kind of makes sense. It provides some redundancy for the nuclear plants. We might end up wanting to have a battery station for the nuclear plant. Game crash. As I was saying before my game crashed again, we might even want to add a battery bank up here because that's going to provide some redundancy for both the nuclear power plant and the solar plant, serving dual purpose. Plus, we already have our major high voltage lines emanating from this area to serve the rest of our county, so I figure this might be the perfect place to have yet another major power facility. Placing the solar power plant right in the middle over here leaves a little bit of room on both sides, so maybe we'll look at some signature industries or maybe just some normal industries, but let's go ahead and place all this down. And a little bit of time later, and we have our major facilities all placed down. I have not detailed anything up yet, so things are still looking a little bit messy and worse for wear, especially with these cliffs that we got around here. But we do have all the necessary facilities that we want. Starting down here, we've got the parking that we described. This is our major parking lot off-site from the nuclear power plant that has a couple of bus lanes in here, because I think that we're going to want to have some inter-campus bus service. It'll probably take people from whatever the closest train station is, or commuters, bring them into the facility over here, stop in the parking lot so we can pick up anybody who parked in here, and take them to all the different jobs all around there. It'll probably just be one bus, maybe two, to circulate around the area, but it'll provide a pretty essential service for this industrial Seoul Industries campus, especially seeing as we have 1,300 employees across this entire facility, and nowhere near 1,300 parking spaces. Next up, we got a couple of warehouses, storage areas, and general offices, or just a general place for people to meet, hang out, work, or produce things for the nuclear power plant. A little bit of parking there, got a cross street added in where we got these different warehouses stacking their way up. We have got an office over here in that empty parcel that I mentioned beforehand. We have a couple of areas on either side that probably needs to get detailed in our next detailing time lapse, but that's there for now. Then I put in a tiny park right next to that, just to kind of bridge the gap between some of these key walls that we got going on. Oh my god. And lastly, I placed down this tiny park, which my game has crashed 5 times just trying to show off, so I can't show it off in the most ideal angle, but what it's done is it's smoothed out the edge of this key wall that we got going on around here. And my game crashed again. Well, and after another game crash, with all of our buildings now in, it's time to polish this entire industrial area with some major landscaping and detailing work. And I think I'm going to try and do this in a time lapse. If I'm lucky, this will completely transform the look and feel of Seoul Industries. with all that landscaping done, we're back with a basically complete build. As you saw, I added a whole lot of rocks and riprap throughout this region. I think it's just one of the best ways in City Skylines to make shorelines look good, especially when you're not dealing with quay walls and dealing with natural shorelines. Either adding beaches, riprap, or heavy foliage are some of the best ways to make terrain look good, and I think we did an absolutely fantastic job. Another key part of my detailing adventures was the addition of lots of surfaces. Over this playthrough, we've installed a whole lot of community-made surfaces, and each one of those surfaces really just makes this whole area feel so much better. My personal favorite addition, though, is this new control rod segment here in this cooling area. This uses just a couple of the pipes from the advanced water pumping station, plus some barrels and tanks to really pull this all together. But when I get submerged in the water like this, it looks absolutely amazing and really resembles the submerged control rods from the Cofrentis nuclear power plant that we were looking at earlier in the episode. There are a few touches here that I'm pretty proud of, especially this entrance area. You would expect that a major industrial facility like this would want some sort of a glorified entrance, and even though they don't have the room to do that right at the entrance here on Crest Street, where they just have a couple of check-in and check-out booths, they did manage to do it coming down this curve. They put in a signature tree and built out a bunch of bushes all around there, just wherever they had the space, and I think that really frames in this whole curve area quite nicely. Over on the other side over here, I also added in some extra check-in and check-out booths, and here we're again using those railroad crossing barriers as a way to prevent entry into the facility. This is our fire access road, so I made sure that it was a little bit less visible than some of our other roads, and I put a whole bunch of trees out here just to really emphasize the boundaries of Soul Industries, to really highlight the exclusion area. So now we pretty clearly have this tree boundary running all the way around the parcel, and Soul Industries as a whole just feels that much more complete. One thing that I'm not particularly satisfied with still, just looking at this from above, is this single power pole over here. If you have any thoughts on what happens to this in real life, please do let me know. I'm pretty used to seeing power lines being run across water on some really high up platforms, but I'm not actually sure what happens in situations like this, where the most efficient treatment is just to run the high voltage power lines directly across, so it doesn't make sense to have a floating pontoon or even an anchored one just like that in the middle of a river, especially because it's creating this bottleneck point and making it even tighter to get through this area. So I'm not really sure, but please do let me know. I am slightly worried about the erosion on this pillar as well, but that's not the biggest concern that I have, so I think I'll let it be for now. I did go through with recolor in a lot of these and make sure that everything felt a little bit coherent. Wherever possible, we have darker roofs, whether they're a little bit more brown, a little bit more gray, or just straight up black roofs. It just feels a little bit more coherent. We've got some brick and red colors commonly placed throughout all of these areas as well. Overall, I'm just really happy with how this has turned out. It's not the most dense nuclear power area, but it is pretty dense, which I think makes sense, considering Soul Industries would have bought this property, built up this nuclear power plant, and as Soul Industries has grown and become more wealthy, it would have tried to maximize the amount of space that it has available for itself within its property boundaries without having to buy any additional area around here. I have a lot of things planned for the next episode, but the final touch for this area is going to be adding a circulator bus route throughout this entire area, using these little bus lanes that we got here in the parking lot. So I'll be looking forward to that in the next episode, but for now, I think I'm pretty satisfied with how Soul Industries is looking, so it's time for some outro cinematics. I really just wanted to wrap up this episode by saying thank you to all of you, everybody who's been watching these episodes, supporting me on these. This has been one of my favorite series that I've worked on this channel to date. I've been putting a lot of time, effort into polishing it, thinking a lot about the way that the episodes are formatted, the things that I'm doing in them, and I've just been having a whole lot of fun while making these videos, and you clearly have been enjoying them too, with just so much support, more than I could have ever thought. And I really appreciate all of you for watching these videos and sticking with me throughout this entire process. Videos recently have been a little bit lighter from me, and I do apologize for that. It's the summer season here in Seattle, and summertime is absolutely beautiful here. The weather is perfect, tourism is booming, and there are just endless things to do. From about mid-June until mid-September, my schedule is just completely packed. I've done trips to New York, trips to Alaska, trips to different areas all throughout this region. I've had family come in. I've moved apartments, gotten a bunch of medical appointments done, had surgery, went to concerts, went on boat rides, went to the beach, just relaxed, and all this whole time I've been working a full-time job. As you might expect, that leaves not a whole lot of time to record these videos, so I'm really sorry that these videos have been a little bit more sporadic, but I am still having a whole lot of fun. So even throughout these Stardew Valley videos, City Skylines videos, whatever it is, be assured that there's always more content on the way at some point, and keep an eye out on Saturday mornings for a new episode. If you have thoughts on what we should do, continue to let me know in the comments as you have been doing. There are so many different things that I have on my to-do list for the next few episodes. I'm not even sure what to do in what order. And as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, we might be looking at introducing some buses into our city, which is just going to be incredibly exciting, especially after the introduction of trams that we did today. I'm pretty sure I say this every episode, but I'm really happy with how the city of Lemuria and the entire Veridian County is turning out. We've got such interesting, unique builds that I'm putting throughout here. They're detailed, they're beautiful, they're functional, and I'm learning a whole lot about how the world works. Learning about the nuclear power plants today was one of my favorite things. And it's not like I encounter nuclear power plants particularly often, but understanding the way that our energy grid is built, and particularly in a world of AI where companies like Microsoft are building their own nuclear power plants in order to power major AI developments, I think it's really important that more of us are educated on the ways that these technologies work, like just how much water, not just AI, but nuclear power plants consume. Having a greater depth of thought about nuclear facilities really lets you think about how much safekeeping and safeguarding there is in these facilities, how green they are, but also how complex it is as a technology to produce such massive energy output in such a small area. It's fascinating technology, and I'm really enjoying learning more about the world by nature of this series, and I hope you are too. At least for now, this episode's running on a little bit as usual. I've recorded it over a long period of time, I've edited it over a long period of time, so it's a little bit more janky than my recent episodes have been, but I'm still pretty happy with how it's turned out, and I'm really happy with how the build looks at the end of the day. So I thank you all for joining me on this adventure, and I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.